For 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire dominated 3 continents, projecting power from Vienna to Mecca. But by the eve of World War I, the so-called sick man of Europe was already bankrupt, bled by broken tax systems, foreign debt, and the surrender of its economic independence. The empire's downfall was not just lost battles, it was a financial collapse in slow motion. How did a superpower hollow out from within until its armies were fighting on empty? The answer begins with a single turning point. 1683. The Ottoman army stands at the gates of Vienna, hoping to carve another province into the empire's vast map. Instead, the siege fails. What follows is not just a lost battle, but the end of an era. For centuries, every victory had brought new land, new tribute, and fresh streams of revenue. Now, the borders harden. The empire stops growing. The consequences are immediate and far-reaching. Without conquest, the state can no longer rely on spoils to fund its army or its bureaucracy. The old system, built on the promise of endless expansion, begins to unravel. Treasury ledgers from the late 17th century record the first cracks. The revenue from newly conquered lands drops to zero. The Ottoman heartlands, once surrounded by expanding frontiers, now face retreat. Hungary is lost by 1699. The Peloponnese, Crimea, and the northern Balkans soon follow. Each territory surrendered means less tax, fewer recruits, and a shrinking economic base. Maps from this period tell the story without words. In 1683, Ottoman control stretches deep into Central Europe. By the early 1700s, the empire's outline contracts, its reach pulled back by enemy advances and diplomatic treaties. The treasury feels the strain. A fiscal system designed for growth cannot adapt to stasis. The state is forced to squeeze more from the lands it still holds, but the numbers no longer add up. The age of easy money is over. This is the moment the empire's finances begin their slow collapse. The loss at Vienna is not just a military setback. It is the point where the Ottoman economic engine stalls. From here, every fiscal decision is shaped by a simple, inescapable fact. The empire can no longer pay for itself through conquest. The story of Ottoman bankruptcy begins on the frontiers, as the map itself starts to shrink. The Timar system, for centuries the backbone of Ottoman finance and military strength, began to unravel as the empire's borders froze. Without new conquests, the state could no longer grant fresh land to its cavalry, the Sipahis. What had once been a self-sustaining cycle, land for service and service for land, broke down as the flow of new revenue stopped. Treasury records in the Defter-i-Kabir show the numbers slipping year by year. In 1683, Timar revenues made up 80% of the state's income. By 1700, it was less than half. The empire scrambled to fill the gap. Cash taxes, called avariz, replaced the old grain and livestock levies. These new taxes hit hard. Collection efficiency, once as high as 90% under the Timar system, fell to about 65% as corruption and evasion spread. Tax farming, or iltizam, became common, with local notables bidding for the right to collect taxes, then squeezing as much as they could from the population. The state's fiscal pyramid grew steeper, with every layer taking a cut. Petitions from the provinces fill the archives, A Sipahi from Bosnia in 1690 pleads that his land no longer yields enough grain to supply the required horsemen. "I can no longer supply the required horsemen," he writes, as his income shrinks by half. In the city of Kayseri, peasants brought their grievances before the Sharia court in 1764, accusing tax collectors of demands so high that families were forced to sell their oxen just to pay. The consequences rippled through society. As taxes rose and collection grew harsher, farmers abandoned their fields. Artisans and laborers left the countryside, seeking relief in the cities. By the mid-18th century, the empire's own records show that tens of thousands, some estimates reach as high as 350,000, joined the tide of rural migration, draining the agricultural heartlands. The result was a shrinking tax base, falling productivity, and a treasury that could no longer meet its obligations. The old system had collapsed from within, leaving the empire exposed to pressures it could not face alone. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman treasury was running on fumes. With tax revenues shrinking and costs for military reform spiraling, the empire turned to a new solution: foreign credit. In 1854, as the Crimean War drained the state's coffers, Ottoman officials signed their first major loan agreement with British and French bankers. The terms were steep. Only about 80% of the nominal loan value reached Istanbul. The rest lost to commissions and discounts. Interest rates hovered around 6%, but hidden charges pushed the real cost even higher. To secure these loans, the Ottomans pledged customs receipts from key ports like Izmir and monopoly income from salt and tobacco. European financiers, operating through the newly established Ottoman Bank, demanded ever more collateral as the empire's debts grew. Each fresh loan papered over budget shortfalls, but deepened dependence. By 1874, debt service alone consumed more than half the annual budget. The treasury's ledgers from these years read like a warning. The more the empire borrowed, the less control it had over its own income. Credit, once a lifeline, had become a trap. In 1875, the Ottoman treasury could no longer meet its debt payments. The empire declared bankruptcy. European creditors, alarmed at the prospect of losing their investments, demanded direct control over Ottoman revenues. In 1881, the Decree of Muharrem established the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, known as OPDA. This was not a mere oversight committee. It was a permanent foreign-run bureaucracy with sweeping legal authority over the empire's most lucrative income streams. The OPDA charter handed over salt and tobacco monopolies, stamp taxes, and customs duties from major ports. French, British, German, and Italian commissioners sat in Istanbul, calculating exactly how much revenue would be siphoned off before a single coin reached the Ottoman treasury. Treasury ledgers from the 1890s show the scale of this loss. By 1890, 1 out of every 5 liras collected by the state went straight to OPDA. By the eve of World War I, the figure had climbed to nearly 30%. Provincial governors and parliamentarians protested, but the legal framework was ironclad. The OPDA allocations appeared as a separate line in the budget, immune to Ottoman policy. For the first time in 6 centuries, the empire could not decide how to spend its own money. Economic sovereignty had been ceded to foreign hands, not by invasion, but through the signatures on a debt contract. Payroll ledgers from the early 20th century reveal a shrinking share for the Ottoman army. In 1860, the military claimed 35% of the state budget. By 1914, That figure had dropped to just 22%. The numbers tell a story of decline, but the human cost appears in diaries and petitions. Soldiers stationed along the empire's eastern frontier wrote home about missed pay and empty barracks. One conscript in 1902 described going 3 months without wages, watching his fellow recruits grow restless and hungry. Guilds in Istanbul, already struggling under new taxes and foreign monopolies, petitioned for relief, warning that the city's artisans could no longer afford to supply uniforms or boots. In the provinces, unrest simmered as the state failed to pay its own men. The army, once the backbone of Ottoman power, entered the First World War with morale and readiness already at their lowest ebb. By the time the First World War erupted, the Ottoman treasury was already hemmed in by foreign creditors. When Enver Pasha's war ministry pleaded for emergency funds to buy artillery and ammunition, the finance minister's reply was blunt. The OPDA charter blocked any diversion of customs revenue. German loans arrived, but they could not break the legal grip of the debt administration. In 1918, as British and Allied forces advanced at Megiddo, Ottoman commanders reported their men running out of shells and cartridges. Letters from the front described battalions forced to retreat, not by enemy fire, but by empty magazines and unpaid wages. The empire's war effort collapsed under the weight of fiscal chains locked in place decades before. On the battlefield, bankruptcy proved as fatal as any army. Economic collapse isn't just numbers on a ledger. It is the silent weapon behind every lost war. Today, nations still trade pieces of sovereignty for borrowed lifelines. When debt replaces independence, defeat is only a matter of time. History's warnings come not with cannon fire, but with unpaid bills.